The chamber of the Galactic Senate stood in eerie silence. Holographic embers flickered over the ruined seats, displaying the last official vote before everything collapsed. The decision that sealed their fate was recorded in glowing blue letters. Resolution 7-13, War Against Humanity, passed unanimously. Arch-strategist Vathran of the Zalith Dominion stood among the wreckage, his deep-set eyes scanning the ruins of what was once the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and something fouler, the undeniable stench of war's aftermath. There had been no grand siege, no prolonged battle. The Senate had gathered in arrogance, declaring war against a species they deemed insignificant, yet now there was no one left to enforce their decree. A hollow recording flickered to life, capturing the last moments before catastrophe. The senators, composed of a dozen species, debated in confident, condescending tones. The humans refused to comply. Their refusal to submit to the Galactic Concord cannot go unanswered. A reptilian Luthok ambassador had hissed, "They are primitive. Their weapons are rudimentary. They have no standing fleets capable of resisting us." An Aeltherian strategist had agreed, their crystalline form shimmering with smug assurance. "Then let it be war," a Zalith senator had declared, its voice like a grinding avalanche. They had sealed their own fate in that moment. Vathran clenched his jaw as he watched. The recording's final seconds, when the humans responded, it wasn't a plea. It wasn't surrender. It was a transmission from a single human officer, a woman with battle-hardened eyes and a voice as steady as the void itself. To the esteemed Galactic Senate, you have voted for war. You will get war. But by the time you realize what that truly means, there will be no one left to vote again. The message ended. The Senate had laughed. Hours later, the first Senate world fell. Then another. Then another. Vathran's claws tightened around the edge of a shattered podium. The humans had done something no species had ever achieved before. They had turned the Galactic Concord's own arrogance into their downfall. And as the last remnants of the Senate lay in ruin, Vathran could only whisper the truth. None of them had seen coming. We thought we were exterminating them, but we were merely teaching them how to win. Vathran stood amidst the ruins of the Galactic Senate, his mind still replaying the moment humanity responded to the declaration of war. It had been so simple. One message, one warning. The arrogance of the Senate had blinded them to its meaning. But now the meaning was clear. He turned, stepping over the remains of what had once been the Concord's most secure chamber. Once this place had been untouchable. The governing body of 1,000 worlds, the architects of peace and war alike, had made their decisions here. Their will had shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. Now, there was nothing left but silence. Vathran was not a fool. As the arch-strategist of the Zalith Dominion, he had studied war his entire life. His species had conquered, ruled, and enforced order for centuries. He had been present when the Senate's War Council had drafted their plan against humanity. It had been meticulous, calculated. The Concord's forces outnumbered the humans 100-1. Their fleets were superior. Their technology was generations ahead. Victory had been an inevitability, or so they had believed. He stepped toward a console, one of the few still functioning amid the wreckage. A damaged holoscreen flickered to life, showing the classified intelligence reports from the first phase of the war, the moment things began to change. Year 1 of the Galactic Human War. The first engagements had gone as expected. Conquered fleets obliterated human colonies with overwhelming firepower. The humans fought back with primitive resistance, outdated. Planetary defenses, kinetic railguns, and chemical-based warheads. They lost every major battle in the opening months, but they did not surrender. Instead, something terrifying happened. Year 2. The humans adapted. Their fleets, once scattered and inefficient, became fast-moving strike forces. They abandoned traditional warfare. They didn't fight where the Concord expected them to. They used deception, ambushes, and suicidal last stands that inflicted disproportionate damage. They sacrificed their own ships if it meant taking down something larger. They turned their losses into lessons, their desperation into strategy. The Senate still believed victory was inevitable. Year 3. Entire Concord fleets disappeared. Supply chains collapsed. Human forces infiltrated core systems and dismantled infrastructure from within. They were not just soldiers, they were insurgents, saboteurs, and assassins. They learned the weaknesses of each species, exploiting biology, psychology, and technology alike. It was no longer a war. It was an extinction event. Veithran exhaled sharply, his talons clicking against the console. He had seen species fall before, but never like this. The Concord had expected humanity to break, to crumble under superior force. Instead, they had shattered the Concord itself. He turned away from the flickering reports, his gaze falling to a single object in the wreckage, a human flag. It had been left deliberately, draped over the broken remains of the High Chancellor's throne. A silent message. Veithran's mandibles tightened as he stared at the fabric. The Concord had voted for war, and humanity had made sure there was no one left to vote again. Veithran clenched his claws as he read through the final transmissions of the war. Each report painted a picture of destruction, not of humanity, but of the Galactic Concord itself. It was a slow unraveling, a death by 1,000 unseen cuts. At first, humanity had been nothing more than an inconvenience, a species too stubborn to know when it had lost. But as the years passed, the narrative shifted. What had begun as a campaign of extermination became a desperate fight for survival. Not for the humans, but for the Concord. The Galactic Concord had launched the war with overwhelming force. Their fleets had bombarded human colonies into submission. Earth itself was placed under blockade. Every military analysis concluded that the war would be over within a standard cycle. Humanity refused to comply. Instead of fighting head-on, they disappeared into deep space. Their ships, once primitive, in comparison to the Concords, became ghosts in the void. They hit supply lines, ambushed isolated patrols, and vanished before retaliation could arrive. The humans were not winning battles, but they were making the cost of victory unbearable. The first signs of a deeper threat emerged when Concord supply stations went dark one by one. Entire fleets that should have been invincible against human forces began to suffer mysterious failures. Admiral Tazar, a decorated war leader of the Zirith Collective, had laughed when reports arrived of a human vessel approaching his warship. It was a single, outdated corvette, a speck against his fleet of dreadnoughts, and yet, within hours, his entire armada had been dead in space. The humans had done something impossible. They had cracked the Zirith power grids, overloading them. Remotely, the invincible fleet became defenseless as human strike teams boarded the ships and took them one by one. The final transmission from Admiral Tazar's flagship played in Veithran's mind. They don't fight like us. They don't think like us. They don't fear like us. It was the last anyone had heard from him. Humanity had no right to be winning. They lacked the technological superiority, the numbers, the firepower. But it was no longer a war of fleets and weapons. It was a war of fear. Entire Concord battalions stationed on key worlds began to desert. Some claimed they had seen human soldiers appear in the dead of night, whispering warnings before vanishing. Others reported their commanding officers mysteriously disappearing. The war councils dismissed it as paranoia. Then the messages began. Across every network in the Concord, human transmissions spread like wildfire. They weren't threats. They weren't propaganda. They were stories, tales of human resilience, of impossible survival. of lone soldiers lost behind enemy lines, surviving against all odds, of entire Concord ships whose crews vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a single human message. Your war is already lost. The effect was catastrophic. Concord fleets refused to engage unless they outnumbered the enemy 10-1. Morale crumbled. Elite soldiers abandoned their posts rather than face the humans. The war was no longer about victory. It was about escaping annihilation. The Galactic Senate, once arrogant and overconfident, was desperate. Their fleets had been whittled down. Their war leaders were either dead, missing, or refusing to fight. Entire systems declared neutrality, unwilling to risk humanity's wrath. The final decision was made: sue for peace. Veithran himself had been part of the delegation sent to negotiate humanity's terms. They had expected a demand for territory, reparations, or at the very least, a ceasefire. Instead, the humans gave only one response: a single transmission. The Senate voted for war. You chose this. There will be no negotiations. There will be no peace. There will be no Senate. And that was the last message the Concord ever received. Within days, the Senate's homeworld was erased. No orbital bombardment, no drawn-out battle. When reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but emptiness, no bodies, no wreckage, no signs of life. Humanity had not just defeated the Concord, they had made them disappear. Veithran closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the ruined console. His kind had always believed themselves the masters of war, the architects of conquest. They had believed humanity was nothing more than an insignificant obstacle, a lesser species. But now, as he stood in the ruins of what was once the most powerful Senate in the galaxy, he understood the truth. They had not gone to war with primitives. They had awakened something far worse, a species that refused to lose, a species that turned every loss into a lesson, a species that, when pushed to the brink, did not break. They became extinction itself. Veithran stood on the bridge of his personal warship, the last warship of the Concord. His species, the Zalith Dominion, had once ruled the battlefield with unparalleled strategy. Now he commanded nothing but ghosts. Every distress signal from surviving Conquered forces had gone unanswered. Every fleet he once relied upon had vanished, and now humanity was coming for him. The void outside his viewport was silent, but Veithran knew better. Humanity did not announce their attacks. There would be no grand fleet formation, no declaration of war or terms of surrender. They had already won, and yet they were still coming, a flicker on the ship's sensors, a distortion in space, a phantom in the dark. Then the lights on his bridge flickered. The crew froze. This was how it always started. For years, humanity had perfected their art of warfare. They no longer relied on open conflict. They had become something else. A myth, a nightmare. Veithran turned to his officers. Bring up all defensive systems. Scan for cloaked ships. The command went unanswered. His officers were staring at the bridge doors. A noise. A metallic creak. Something was inside the ship. Veithran turned slowly, talons flexing as he reached for his sidearm. His mind raced through every security protocol. No ship had docked. No airlocks had been breached. Yet they were here. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision. Then, a voice, low, calm, human. You should have never voted. The bridge went dark. He was no longer on his ship. Cold metal pressed against his back. Dim, flickering light cast shifting shadows across the walls. He recognized the architecture immediately, the ruins of the Galactic Senate. He sat up slowly, his mind struggling to process how he had been brought here. His ship was light years away. His last memory was standing on the bridge, watching the shadows move. A figure stepped forward, human, a woman, her face lined with scars, her eyes sharp as a blade. She wore no insignia, no rank, because she did not need one. You are Veithran, she said. It wasn't a question. He exhaled. I am the last. The woman's gaze never wavered. Not yet. She extended a small hollow device and activated. Vathran's twin hearts stopped. The projection displayed every major Concord homeworld. Zalith, Elteria, Zyrith, and countless others. Planets that had once been the beating heart of the galaxy. Now, they were all dark. No ships in orbit, no transmissions, no signs of life. Extinguished. Vathran's claws dug into the metal floor. "What have you done?" The human studied him for a long moment before answering. "We won." Vathran had once believed in the strength of the Galactic Concord, the inevitability of order, the supremacy of his people. Now he was staring at the proof that humanity had rewritten the laws of war. His mandibles clicked. "Why am I alive?" The woman knelt before him, eyes cold. "Because you're the last one who can tell the story." She stood glancing around at the ruins of the Senate. "This is where you voted for war. It's fitting that this is where we end it." Vathran narrowed his gaze. "End it?" She tossed a small object at his feet. "A voting device, a relic of the Senate's old ways. You get one last vote, strategist." Her voice was steady. "Vote for surrender, and humanity will leave the last of your kind in peace. Vote for war." She gestured at the ruins around them. "And you'll join the rest." Vathran stared at the device. The choice was meaningless. The war was over. There was no one left to fight, but he understood the message. Humanity had not just won a war. They had burned the very idea of opposing them out of the galaxy. They were no longer just another species. They were the architects of the new order. Vathran closed his eyes and pressed the button. Surrender. A long silence followed. Then the woman nodded. "Wise choice." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Vathran remained where he was, staring at the ruins, the vote device still warm in his claws. The war had ended, but the galaxy would never be the same again. Vathran sat motionless in the ruins of the Senate chamber, the silent weight of his choice pressing against him like a collapsed star. The last vote had been cast. But this time, it had not been for conquest or annihilation. Surrender. The word echoed through his mind. Not long ago, the idea would have been unthinkable. The Galactic Concord had ruled for centuries, enforcing its will on lesser species with absolute dominance. They had seen humanity as another footnote in history, another rebellion to crush, another primitive race to absorb or eradicate. But the Concord was gone now, and humanity remained. Vathran exhaled and looked around the chamber, the dim flickering of shattered holoscreens, reflecting off broken stone and metal. This place had once decided the fate of trillions. Now it was a tomb. A cold wind whispered through the ruins. He was alone, or so he thought. A low hum resonated through the chamber. Vathran's claws flexed as he turned toward the source. A small black drone hovered a few meters away, its sleek, angular form completely alien to anything the Concord had ever designed. A single glowing red eye studied him in silence. Then it spoke. Message from command. The war is over. Humanity holds dominion. The remnants of the Concord will not be pursued if they remain in compliance. A pause. Do not mistake this for mercy. The drone's red eye flared once before it turned and disappeared into the shadows. Vathran released a slow breath. Humanity had not just conquered the Concord. They had replaced it. Days passed. Vathran wandered the remnants of the once glorious Senate world. He was no prisoner. There were no human patrols, no occupying forces, because they didn't need to be there. The galaxy knew what had happened. No Concord fleet would rise again. No fractured government would seek revenge. The war had been a lesson, and every surviving species had learned it well. But there was something worse than defeat. It was the silence. Where once the Concord's core worlds had bustled with life, they were now dead stars, hollow, abandoned, wiped clean of civilization. Humanity had not destroyed them. No orbital bombardments, no scorched earth tactics. The populations had simply vanished. No one knew how. No one dared ask. The survivors, scattered across the stars, whispered of things far worse than war. Of shadows moving in dead cities, of human ships appearing without a sound and leaving without a trace. Veithran knew the truth. Humanity had evolved beyond conventional warfare. They no longer needed to invade to conquer. They had rewritten the laws of war, of fear, of existence itself, and now they watched. Veithran found himself standing before a shattered obelisk that had once displayed the Concord's guiding principles. The inscriptions had been scratched away. In their place, a new message had been carved into the stone. There will be no second war. Beneath it, a signature: humanity. Veithran felt a chill settle over him. The war had ended, but the message was clear. Humanity would never be threatened again, and if the galaxy was wise, it would ensure they never had a reason to raise their weapons. Veithran turned his gaze to the stars. Once he had looked at them with certainty, knowing that his people's dominion stretched across countless systems. Now all he saw was the unknown. Humanity had reshaped the galaxy, not just through conquest, but through something deeper. They had become a force of nature, unseen, untouchable, and inevitable. There would be no more votes, no more decrees, only the silent, unspoken law, written in the ruins of the Concord: never challenge humanity again. With a final weary sigh, Veithran turned and walked away from the ruins, his mind forever marked by the war that had ended all wars. And somewhere, hidden in the vast silence of the void, humanity watched, waiting, watching, ensuring that the galaxy never forgot.